watching us right now, if you've joined us right this minute, and we're recording, so it will end up on Facebook. It'll be on Facebook, but it'll end up on YouTube later too. So I'm going to do a little housekeeping to give Facebook a little bit of time to let everybody know that we're here. On release day, Laurie, for this beauty, Hester. Congratulations.
Thank you, Julie. And I'm so happy to be here. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. We're so happy that you're here. And on release day, it's like, it's kind of, I mean, Warwick's takes this as quite an honor to be on release day for this, because there's been a lot of us talking about this book for a very long time. So we are just thrilled that you're here with us today. So
thank you. I'm so happy to have Sarah.
And Sarah, I was just going to hold up this because I'm hoping that at some point we get to talk about mudlarking, because I think I need to go to London just to do that. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Julie, for having both of us. And Laurie, thank you for inviting me to be here tonight with you. I'm so excited to be a part of this as well.
I know it's going to be a great conversation. So just a couple quick housekeeping things before we get started. So if you're watching us on Facebook right now, I'm going to put in the comment section how to order both of these wonderful books. And if you haven't read Sarah's yet, you must. And Hester is just going to, I wish you all the best with this book because it's so wonderful. So I'll put those links in for you. And then also Sarah and Laurie are going to talk for about 35-ish minutes. And then we're going to take some audience questions. So think of those questions, go ahead and pop those in the comment section as well. And I'll bring those into the conversation when they're done. So let me do my due diligence and do the quick little intro of both of these wonderful ladies, and I will go off screen and let them chat. So Laurie Lico Albanese has published fiction, poetry, journalism, travel writing, creative nonfiction, and memoir. Her books include Stolen Beauty, Blue Suburbia, almost a memoir, I love that, Linnell by the Sea, and The Miracles of Prado, co-written with art historian Laura Morowitz.
Yeah.
Laurie is married to a publishing executive and is the mother of 2 children. And Laurie, where are you calling in from us right now?
Montclair, New Jersey, 12 miles outside of Manhattan as the crow flies.
Okay, I love that. So, and Sarah, you're coming to us from Florida, is that right?
Yes, I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Okay, and everything's okay with you?
Yes, thank you. The hurricane hit well south of us, so we escaped the worst of it.
Well, glad for that, but thoughts with everybody on that. So we kind of have both the coasts covered. So hopefully we'll have people joining us from between those coasts, because Warwick's is located, for those of you that don't know, in La Jolla, San Diego, California is where we're located. And my little sign there says 1896. So celebrating 125 years last year. So it was kind of a big year for us. So Sarah Penner is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of The Lost Apothecary, which has been translated into 40 languages worldwide and is set to be turned into a drama series by Fox. Congratulations on that. Yeah. A graduate of the University of Kansas, Sarah spent 13 years in corporate finance and now writes full-time. Like she said, she's in Florida, and over her shoulder is her second book, The London Seance Society, which we can't wait for. It's coming in early 2023. So ladies, have a great conversation. We'll see you in a little while.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everybody that's tuning in on Facebook. This is such an honor for me to be here with Laurie tonight. And part of the reason is that Laurie and I chat probably every 4 to 6 weeks. We hop on Zoom with another author, Fiona Davis, who I'm sure many, if not all of you have heard of. And we've been doing this, Laurie, for maybe a year, has it been?
Yeah, a year, I would say. And we even met in Florida.
Yes, exactly. We had lunch down at it was a restaurant called Shore, not too far from here. So it's very fun and such an honor to be invited to chat with Laurie on her launch night of all nights. And this feels like such a comfortable, familiar conversation for me tonight because we chat regularly. So it's just like we're having another chat, but this time lots of people are tuning in and listening, and so excited for you, Laurie. So I think the first question I want to ask for you is just, how are you feeling? Today is a huge day for you. And of course, readers are excited to get their hands on your book, but this is a story you've been living with now for many years. So how are you feeling now that today is kind of the culmination of all of this work that you've been doing?
Yeah, first, Sarah, thank you for being here with me. And how I'm feeling, to be honest, is lucky. I am. I'm feeling really happy and excited. I feel like I get to go out and talk about a book that I love. And in the past, maybe I've been a little bit more nervous about my launches, but this time I'm just excited. And I think all of us having been in our houses during COVID, and now we're back out in the world, and I'm so excited to go out and, meet readers and talk to people.
Definitely. And you said you were out signing books today, right?
Oh yeah, I went to my local bookstore, which is Watch on Booksellers right here in Montclair, New Jersey. And I just did a very informal signing. And even still, when I got there, there were a couple of friends waiting, which was so fun. It was just so great. It's such a great experience this time around. Not that it's not always been, but this book feels a little different somehow. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think that it's clear the early reception that the book has been getting has been extraordinary. And it's been so fun as your friend and a fellow author to watch all of this well-deserved attention come your way. And I know you said a couple of weeks ago that sometimes it's hard to receive compliments, and being a humble person, you don't really know what to do with that. But all of this is so well deserved, and it's very fun for all of us to watch you enjoy this day and finally get a chance to meet readers and kind of have this really cool experience. So congratulations before I go any further with my questions.
Thank you.
So I'm sure that there are some people with the book coming out today. They're just hearing about it very recently, maybe just happened to pop into this Facebook event without a whole lot of backstory about what your book is about. So for those people who aren't really familiar with what this story is about, can you give us an overview of the book?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So Hester is inspired by the Scarlet Letter, which many of us had to read in high school. I like holding the book. It makes me feel good. And if you remember, you don't have to have read the Scarlet Letter to enjoy the novel. But if you remember, even if you haven't read the Scarlet Letter, you probably have heard the expression, the Scarlet Letter. And in the novel, The Scarlet Letter, Hester Prynne, the protagonist, is forced to wear a red A on her chest. And the A is meant to shame her for adultery, because the novel is set in Puritan New England. So my book is inspired by the Scarlet Letter, and it's about that woman, Hester. And in this novel, I imagine that there was a real Hester Prynne, that there was a woman who met Nathaniel Hawthorne and became the muse, inspired him to write the Scarlet Letter. So it's a little bit of an origin story for Hester Prynne.
Yes, and that's a good segue into a question that, before this call, I was thinking, what are some of the burning questions that I have about the story that I haven't had a chance to ask you in recent months? And I'd like to talk about the title, especially, as an author myself, and I kind of know a little bit of the back and forth that goes on between publishers and agents and authors as they're deciding on the title. So why did you choose Hester, given that the main protagonist in your story is Isabel?
Yeah. Actually, one of my sisters-in-law had the same question. I think that, from the beginning, the book was titled I Am Hester Prynne. And that was my working title for a long time. And that was kind of, a lot of times you'll have a line in your head that helps you enter the character's voice. And mine was I Am Hester Prynne. And I think in the end, I would have taken a title change under advisement, of course, if my publisher had wanted to change it. But I think there's a lot of name recognition in Hester Prynne. I personally don't know any other Hester besides Hester Prynne. And really, I just think it made the connection to the Scarlet Letter very apparent from the beginning. And I felt that was, well, you don't have to have read the book because it's a universal story about being scorned for your passion. I felt it was important to sort of stay connected to the original story, to the canonical story. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really beautiful kind of like a subtle hint or allusion to the story. Like you, I also don't know of another Hester. And lucky for you that that character in Nathaniel Hawthorne's book had somewhat of a unique name, because if it hadn't been a unique name, you might be in a different situation where you would have to think of something else to evoke that the memories of that story.
Yeah.
So my next question is, in terms of this story idea and how the idea for this book originated, this was a pretty ambitious project because, as you said, so many people had to read The Scarlet Letter in high school. Even if you didn't, you've heard it, you kind of know the basic premise. So then to take that very well-known author, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and sort of fictionalize the origin story for that main character that plays such an important role, that's a very bold and brave decision as an author. So what initially sparked that idea? And as you were asking yourself, can I do this and should I do this? What kind of things were going through your mind?
Yeah. So, Sarah, when I first came up with the idea, I thought, who was the real Hester Prynne? Was there a real Hester Prynne? And then, of course, the next thing was, and what if she could tell her own story? So I went back to the original, to The Scarlet Letter, which is America's first. It's our original historical novel. It was published in 1850, but it was written about Puritan New England. So I go back and I look at this original historical novel, and I realize that Hester Prynne is really filtered through our narrator. Even though she's the main character, she's the woman we remember, the one who has to wear the scarlet A, she never really has her own personal chance to speak. And so, of course, I think there is, right now, we're at a time when people are taking on the old, white male canon and looking at, well, what if somebody else could tell this story? What would it be like if someone else told it? Did she really get to say who she really is and how she really felt? Or do we need to take a closer and deeper look at the story? So that's kind of where I started was thinking I wanted Hester to have her say. And then I decided, I thought, well, was there a real Hester Prynne? If people remember the novel, in the novel, The Scarlet Letter, Nathaniel Hawthorne is your sort of proto-narrator. And he says in the very beginning that he invented this story by something he found hidden behind a brick in his workplace. So he's already inventing this story. He's already giving you the idea that he's inventing this story from the Puritan time. And so I very quickly said, why would I write a story set in Puritan New England? Number one, Nathaniel Hawthorne already did it. And number two, it's kind of dark gray, it's, drab. I wanted to set it in a more exciting time. So then I went back and I looked at Nathaniel Hawthorne, because I was like, well, suppose that Nathaniel Hawthorne actually had a lover in his life, and that's who he modeled Hester Prynne on. And so then I looked into Nathaniel Hawthorne's life, and I realized that there was opportunity, because in all of Nathaniel Hawthorne's biographies, and there have been so many, there have been so many people who wrote biographies and studies and scholarly articles, and there are two questions that always come up. One is, oh, who did he model Hester Prynne on? Because it's always been a sort of literary mystery. And the other is that he kept, like everyone in his time period, he's a contemporary of Emerson's and Louisa May Alcott and her father's, and they all kept very, very extensive journals and day books, and they edited their journals so that they could save them for posterity. But there were 10 years in Nathaniel Hawthorne's life when there was nothing in the record about. The best biographies biographers, even contemporary ones, were forced to say, well, we don't really know what he did in those 10 years after he graduated college. So right there, I was like, oh, handsome young man, graduates from Bowdoin College. They say that he went home and spent 10 years alone in his room learning how to write. And I thought, well, I don't know. There was one thing that they didn't say he did, and he went out walking a lot alone at night. So I was like, okay, there's opportunity, right there, and it's plausible. So from there, I thought, who would Nathaniel Hawthorne know? Who could he become intimate with? And very quickly, well, not quickly, after about a year of trying to make it a character who is a known woman, a famous American feminist named Margaret Fuller, I realized that I couldn't do that. I couldn't make them really, I couldn't imagine having them have sex. And so then I had to invent this character. So that's my sort of long way around that answer, which is I wanted there to be, I wanted it to be plausible. I wanted to feel that I was writing a book that I was writing a response to the Scarlet Letter that the Scarlet Letter deserved.
Yes, I love that. And that's so beautifully said, Laurie. I think my favorite thing that you said in response to that question I asked is Hester's kind of putting yourself in her position and saying, what if she can tell her own story? And that's such a simple statement, but so applicable to what we're seeing today, particularly a lot of historical fiction is finally, we're seeing it through this lens of the person who rightfully owns the story, which was the woman at the center of it. And historically, her story continues to get told by these men. So that's really a beautiful approach. And then I love also what you just said about these. I wasn't aware that there were these 10 kind of mysterious missing years, this gap in Nathaniel Hawthorne's life and sort of his records of what he was doing. And that always I think spurs a lot of ideas, maybe even some conspiracy theories. But I love that you took that and said, okay, well, what's something plausible that I can create here that's still a work of fiction that might explain what he was doing, and then of course what ultimately inspired his most well-known work. So that's really beautiful. And I can tell that you've done a lot of thinking and kind of digging into that because that was such a wonderfully told story. So thank you for teaching me a few things. I'm sure that a lot of people on this who are tuning in are learning a lot from this. How many times, out of curiosity, have you read The Scarlet Letter?
I definitely read it twice in high school, and I definitely read it once through when I sat down to write this. And once I realized that I didn't want it to follow exactly, there's a question of how much do you want to imitate versus how much do you want to pay homage to? So once I realized I wasn't good, I started mapping out the whole story, Sarah. And then I realized, well, that is the last thing I want to do. So then I just kept dipping in. So I would say I've read it three times, but then 20 times in bits and pieces.
Yep.
Yeah. And I have a few friends who are such great friends that they said, I'm going to read The Scarlet Letter before I read your novel. And I said, oh, don't do that to yourself. Especially, he has a very long, tedious introduction that I could barely stand to read myself.
Yep.
I audio and listen to it on audio so that I could get through his introduction.
Sometimes that's the way you've got to do it.
Yeah, right. Audio.
So you touched briefly a few minutes ago on the different eras that are involved in this story and kind of how that weaves into when Nathaniel Hawthorne lived and when he said The Scarlet Letter. And in Hester, we see these brief glimpses of Isabel Gowdy in the 17th century. And then 140 years later, her descendant after many generations, Isabel Gamble. And those two timelines, the voice is very different. The prose is written differently. I almost felt like the 1600 excerpts were very poetic in nature and kind of mysterious, and there's a lot of anguish and angst there. So tell me why you decided to include both timelines, especially given that a few minutes ago you said you really felt like the later era was the more exciting one. So why did you still include that earlier era, and why did you decide to give it such a small sliver of the book?
Yeah, well, so that's a great question, Sarah. And my first most honest answer is when I turned the manuscript into my editor, she asked me for something that could make the connection of the witchiness more apparent and just more vivid in the book. Mm-hmm. And so by that point, I had just, so here's the thing. The grounding in the witch stories is really important. So Nathaniel Hawthorne was not only sort of a shy guy who walked around alone at night, while he wanted to become a writer, but he was very haunted by the fact that his great-great-grandfather, John Hathorne, had been a magistrate in the Salem witch trials. So I connected that to Isabel, my Hester story, by having Isabel be descended from the woman you mentioned, Isabel Gowdie, who it was accused of witchcraft in Scotland at around the exact same time that we had the Salem witch trials here. So this was something that Nathaniel Hawthorne himself was really concerned with, the idea that his family had taken part in the horrible witch trials. And I wanted to be able to show that there's this sort of beneath the current thing that draws them together, the descendant of the accused and the descendant of the accuser. And I actually think one of the things you can do in literature, that you can do in books, in fiction, and in nonfiction to some degree, is you can cut through time, right? You can show how the past is right here. The past is never really gone. The past is right here. And that's what I was sort of trying to show, how even things that we don't know in our ancestors' lives can still reverberate through us. One of the things I do with Isabel, my Isabel, and Isabel Gowdie, the witch from the past, is their stories don't entirely match up. And that's because I did that on purpose, because you would have something passed down to you through your mom and your grandmother or whatever, but it wouldn't be exact. So the way it comes to us isn't exactly the way it happened. So I had a lot of fun doing that in the book, because I think a lot of times the fiction, isn't all neatly boxed up. And I enjoyed doing that.
So was Isabel Gowdie's narrative a later add then, after you had submitted your first draft to your editor, or did any part of her exist in your early drafts?
Yeah, she existed in the early draft, but not as a present character. She was a memory. So the idea that young Isabel, our Isabel, who we read about in the novel, the idea that Isabel is warned about her synesthesia, which we're going to come to, we always had in the book that she's warned that she could be accused of witchcraft. And don't you know, your ancestress was accused of witchcraft in Scotland, and any woman at any time who does something out of line or strange or mystical or magical or misunderstood could be accused of witchcraft. So I had that in the book, but I didn't have us looking at her story. I didn't have us on the ground with her in the 17th century. So that I added later. And what was fun about that too is that some of that stuff is very dark, but you get it in such small snippets. It's only meant to be atmospheric, but also to show you that the fear that Isabel, our character in Salem, is living with is real. Like, it's not that far in the past. And in fact, we know now that people are still being accused of witchcraft in other parts of the world.
Right. And I think you did a great job evoking that fear and anguish. And I am glad that you did kind of include that in small pieces, because like you just said, they were some hard passages to read, and kind of because you bring us in and we feel ourselves kind of going to this persecution for what we can't control and we view as a gift. I think you did a really fabulous job kind of bringing the reader into that scene.
Yeah.
You mentioned a moment ago this phenomenon known as synesthesia. Did I say that correctly?
Synesthesia.
So can you briefly tell listeners what that is and how it plays a role in your story?
Yeah. That was one of the most fun things for me, Sarah, was giving Isabel synesthesia. So synesthesia is when people's senses kind of overlap in their personal experience. So you might, for Isabel, she sees sounds sometimes in color. When people speak, she literally sees it as a color. She also sees letters in color. So wait, is it Lady Gaga? No, it's not. Yeah, Lady Gaga has synesthesia. Billie Eilish has synesthesia. If you think about Kandinsky's paintings that look like music, it's because when he listened to music, he saw color and shapes. So I had a student who had synesthesia when I was tutoring a young woman, and I had never really heard of it before, but it was really fascinating. So I gave that to Isabel. Yes. And
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say that it is really true that people who have the kind of chromosynesthesia, where you see the letters in color, it's not unusual for A to be a red letter. That's a pretty common experience. And so once I saw that, I realized, oh, this way their secret, hers and Nathaniel's and the novel, all can kind of interweave. And that was fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm curious, why did you decide to incorporate that synesthesia via embroidery? And I guess that the larger question then is, why did you make Isabel's profession in that embroidery textile space as opposed to another form of art in which the same phenomenon could be applied, like painting or something similar?
Yeah. So in the Scarlet Letter, Hester Prynne is an embroiderer. And in fact, when I was writing my book, I really started asking myself, here's this woman, Hester Prynne, who's basically been canceled, right? But all the women in Boston still keep going to her in her place where she's been outcast to ask her to embroider for them. And in that time period, in the 1700s, in the 1600s, every woman knew how to embroider. Every woman knew how to make a dress, from the queen down to the simplest farm wife. Everybody knew how to embroider. And I thought, what would make Hester Prynne's embroidery so exceptional? And as I was reading through the book again, when I was reading through the Scarlet Letter, I thought, wow, it's almost as if she has synesthesia. Well, maybe she did have synesthesia. And then I thought, okay, even if she did have synesthesia, by the way, here's an interesting fact. Emerson's youngest, Ralph Waldo Emerson's daughter had synesthesia, but they didn't really know what it was. There are just some tiny little reports of her saying that she saw color in unexpected ways with words. So I thought, suppose Hester Prynne did have synesthesia. Suppose Nathaniel Hawthorne knew someone who had synesthesia. And then it was very beautiful to sort of make it weave in with her work. And of course, it's something that she doesn't really understand. Even now, I interviewed people with synesthesia, and people don't realize it's unusual. Sometimes I don't know that what they're experiencing is different than other people's experience until they're made aware of it. And people often were told not to talk about their synesthesia. That makes you sound crazy. Maybe not so much anymore, but then for sure. And so it just worked really nicely to have her see color. And then I had a lot of fun with it. And as I like to say, we work with words all the time. It's so black and white. It's really fun to think about color, to write about a creative process. I did a lot of research into the names of colors like foxglove green. I mean, it was fun.
So to that point, do you personally embroider, or did you learn to embroider as part of this project?
I have embroidered. And then I embroidered something for my college boyfriend's denim jacket, and it was beautiful. And then he left it on the train, and I think that was kind of the last thing I ever embroidered. But I did go out and get some thread, and I kind of love looking at it and kind of playing around with it. But I think I'm not a perfectionist enough. But I have it here. I wouldn't mind trying it again someday in a slow time.
Sure. Yeah. And the cover, of course, is, if you wouldn't mind holding up the book again, Laurie, the cover, of course, is meant to reflect this really beautiful embroidery and kind of really stand off the page visually. What was the cover design process like for you? And were you surprised by the initial concepts that came across from the team? And what kind of discussions did you have around that?
You might remember some of those early covers, Sarah. So the cover process was actually very enlightening, and it was very democratic. And I have to say that as an author, you don't always have any input into the cover. And so they showed me some covers, and in the beginning, each time you're presented a cover, someone says to you from the publishing house, "We love this cover." And then you open the image and you're like, "Oh, thank God nobody has their camera on you," because you're like, "I don't love this image." And the thing is, very quickly, the designer, Olga Gerlich, who did a beautiful job, she very quickly went from one thing, which was kind of tropey that I didn't like, to really beautiful representations of embroidery. But it was really, really pretty. It was so pretty, it could have been an embroidery cover. And when you look at this book jacket, it kind of has the dark, twisted stuff that is in the book. Because one of the things is Nathaniel Hawthorne was a contemporary of Edgar Allan, of Poe's. And so he was a Gothic writer. You know, there are strange phenomenons that go on in the book and that go on in the Scarlet Letter. So when we hit on this when Olga and, you know, my editor and the team at St. Martin's hit on this cover, we were all thrilled. And yeah,
I think it's absolutely magnificent. And for readers and listeners who are tuning in, to echo what Laurie said, there's nothing more terrifying for an author than getting that email in your inbox that has the cover image and clicking that button to open it up, because you have to understand, a book is not a book in a reader's eye until it has a visual. It doesn't matter who the author is. It doesn't matter what the story is about, how fresh and exciting the premise is. Until a reader can see a visual, the book does not exist. And that visual goes everywhere on all of these platforms universally. And so it's a terrifying thing. And I know well, Laurie, the experience of opening up images that I'm thrilled with and then images that I'm less than thrilled with. But the great thing is your publisher, your agent, your art team, you, of course, as the author, you all want the same end goal, which is to have a really beautiful cover that readers are excited to pick up off the shelf at the store, and hopefully draws their eye, especially relative to the titles next to it, because that's what you want. You want something catchy, and I think that your team absolutely accomplished that with HESTER. And I was just admiring as you were holding that up how some of the vines kind of wrap around the letters. Yes,
exactly. And the funny thing about a cover is the other covers were fine, but a cover is like a dress or a jacket or your hair. You could put on a dress that literally looks great on you, that everybody loves, and you're like, it is so not me. And a book cover feels the same way. You kind of feel like you're wearing it when you go out to talk about your book. And it even if it's beautiful and you acknowledge it's beautiful, if it doesn't say, it's really representative of what's inside, and it can feel very deeply personal. It is deeply personal. And if it's wrong, that's kind of hard. And so having it be so right is so great.
Yes. And I have to say, your outfit selection matches the flowers perfectly. I assume that was on purpose. And I think and your earrings. Yes. And I think it's great. I have pink on too. That's a slightly different shade of the flowers. I'm waiting for my finished copy. I think your editor held off a couple of days given the hurricane, but now that mail is back in service, I'm very excitedly awaiting my finished copy to show off.
Your cover is so beautiful. I mean, let's talk about this for a second.
And then I have one more question for you. But yes, this is my next book coming out, The London Seance Society. Originally scheduled to come out April 11th, but now we've bumped it up 3 weeks, so it comes out March 21st. And it's all about ghosts and seances in Victorian London. And I absolutely love this book. I personally think it's better than my debut, The Lost Apothecary. And my husband thinks it's much better. He flew through this book. And I'm thrilled with the cover. It has some of that hot pink floral element as well. So we share that in common with our covers.
And I love how it's of a piece with The Lost Apothecary. I just want to say one thing about the London Seance Society. The ending of that book, no one ever will see that ending coming. Never. It is so good. Yeah.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you. I was pretty ecstatic when that ending came to me. So
Yeah,
I'm going to
really
ask you
talk about that someday. We'll talk more about that. Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to ask you one more question before we have Julie pop on and she'll do audience Q&A. And I love that have saved this question and kind of listening as you've talked throughout this discussion. Such an important theme in HESTER, as well as to me personally, this theme runs throughout my books. And I think a lot of our readers and listeners care about this as well, is the idea of women finally reclaiming the ability to tell their own stories. And I mentioned earlier, we're seeing so much great historical fiction right now in which we're seeing these never before told stories of the women who were at the front and center and just never got credit for it. So I think my final question for you is, what message or messages around women's empowerment and feminism do you hope that readers take from HESTER?
Yeah, it's so interesting, Sarah, because we start writing these books and we know we want to have a strong heroine, and you want it to be a female-centric story, and yet you can't say, I am going to write a book about female empowerment, because that will just fall flat. So what you have to do, and you and I both know it, is you have to find someone who sort of already has a power in her, and it becomes awakened in the story, and I think that's what I love when I think about the book and when I think about your books, and a lot of the books that do to have a woman step out of the shadows, is that you get to watch this character awakening to her power, because for Isabel, my HESTER, she has synesthesia. Synesthesia is a gift. Oh, wait, synesthesia is a curse. She has to keep it a secret. And one of the things I most enjoyed with this book was, I think a lot of creative people as well, and this is connected to feminist creativity, feminine creativity. A lot of people who are creative, it feels like a gift, it feels like a burden. And in order, I think for Isabel, and for many heroines that we see in historical fiction and even not historical fiction, a common journey for people is learning how to step into your power, how to inhabit it, and that is what I really loved about writing this book, was doing that.
Yes. I love that so much. I am going to now turn it over to Julie, who's the bookseller with Warwick's, and I think she's probably got some questions from the audience.
Have some great questions, and you have lots of love going on in the chat on Facebook. So go back after and look at our Facebook page, and don't do it now because it'll drive you crazy because there's a delay.
Okay.
But,
I can't even if I wanted to. So okay.
But go on after, because there's so many, lots of people just, congratulating you on the release, and just so much love going on over there. So it's really fun.
For coming and spending some time with us.
Yeah, really fun. And you're so right on the feminist aspect of this. And that was the one thing that I took away from the book too, is just how it's almost like these weak men. There were these strong women, but weak men that had to suppress them in this, and it's just, but it was just amazing. This is such a delicious book. I just love everything about it. So, yay. So, okay. So question here. So Kelly has a question. She says this book addresses freedom in many ways. And so she's curious what prompted you to include the topic of slavery also.
Yeah, great question. So of course, now when we're looking back at the Scarlet Letter, now we know that in Hawthorne's time, and even in Puritan times, there were people of color in New England, in Salem. But when you read one of Hawthorne's novels, you would think there was never a person of color at all in anywhere in New England. And so when I started looking at 1829 as a storyline, and I realized that in fact the first slave ship had been built in Marblehead, American-built slave ship had been built in Marblehead and sailed out of Salem in the 1700s. I just knew that I needed to just be inclusive, just look at who was really there. And there really was. I have an important secondary character who's an African-American woman, and there's a caterer in the story. His name is John Remond, and he really was a free Black man in Salem, and he was a prosperous caterer. And his children, this is in the time period of my novel, 1829, and his children become very active abolitionists. And so I just felt it was already there. That
Right.
character, Mercy, stepped into my story, and a very good friend of mine, a writer, Alice Elliott Dark, said, "Oh, she looks like she's going to be an important character." And until Alice said it, I didn't know she was. But Alice is so smart and then she was. Yeah.
But it is, but I mean, that's to your point. It was what was happening. That's what life was, but it never bubbled up into who was writing the history.
Exactly. Exactly.
With
Yeah.
with the HIS in there.
His story. Yes.
His story didn't quite capture everything that was happening in the daily lives.
Salem was a very international city. Before the War of 1812, it was the richest men, some of the richest men in the world, in the whole world, lived in Salem because of the shipping industry.
Right.
And
Tony's asking a question kind of related to this. And her question, did it require some courage to risk criticism for including African-American characters though? But it's, it was part of, there is that own voice thing, but I think that it was part of the daily life. So I don't know, how would you answer that?
I mean, for me, I didn't write those characters in first person, so I wasn't inhabiting their minds. And so no, I felt, but of course I felt like I needed to really make it correct. I really need to get it right. And so I did have a historian at Wagner College, a woman who's the head of the history department there, read it for me for accuracy, for accurate representation of people of color in that time period. Yeah. Yes. So it takes a little more effort. And
done so well. I mean, and that it's, so you did a great job with that. Before we get to another question, I just have to say, because it'll go out of my old brain here, I want to sit in on one of and I think that both of you need to do either a podcast. You, Laurie, Sarah, and Fiona has to be probably one of the best conversations. You all need to do a podcast.
We talk about writing. It's very helpful. Yeah. Unbelievable.
It's very candid discussions, sometimes with a few curse words, but we authors, we have to lean on each other. It's a weird industry with a lot of odd hurdles, and we've got to stick together.
Well, you do, and that's the thing and nobody's so you said, Laurie, I love that you said how lucky you feel, because there is everybody's path to publication is so different. There's not this magic one way. But sharing with each other helps you go, oh, that wasn't such an odd thing that happened, or whatever whatever it is. I
live in a town where in Montclair there are a lot of writers, and there are so many writers that sometimes if we're talking about non-writers, we say civilians. They're civilians.
I love it. So to your point, Sarah, I understand that you probably wouldn't be able to broadcast it out, but maybe you guys could have your conversation first, get all the green rooms, and then broadcast. Yep. I'm sure you have nuggets of information and lots of knowledge to share with other writers. Okay, Melissa has a question. She wants to know. Is it Melissa out? Yep, there you go. Hi, Melissa. I'm glad you're asking. What was the most exciting part about building background historical knowledge?
Traveling to Salem. I got to travel to Salem. The best thing about writing historical fiction is if you pick someplace where you want to travel. And I don't know if my sister Donna is on the Zoom, but I went to Salem with Donna a couple of times, and we went to the Peabody Essex Museum, and, going live, walking the streets, seeing and New England has really done a great job of preserving its history. And so that was really fun. It was really fun. And also the dresses, it was, in the beginning, I didn't know if I wanted to make her, if her ambition was big enough to be a dressmaker with, her own shop. That was what she dreamt of, and being a master embroiderer. But then I really quickly realized that actually it was an incredible ambition for a woman to want to have her own business in
Yeah. Oh,
in the early 1800s.
for sure. And Salem is, I've been to Salem only once, but you walk into that city and there is a different vibe. There is just a different feeling when you walk into that town and you walk those streets. The inhabitants are still there from back in those days.
I'm going to Salem and I'm speaking at the Peabody Essex Museum, which is where I went to do research. And it's just that's such a great full circle feeling.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of, so back to, I think I might have said this in the green room, but to Sarah, to your book, The Mudlarking. I mean, did you actually, I'm fascinated. So while I have you, I have to ask this. Did you actually mudlark?
Yes, I did. So what Julie is referring to is my debut, The Lost Apothecary. Toward the beginning of the story, a woman goes mudlarking along the River Thames in central London. And what that means is she's basically scrounging around in the river for valuable or interesting historical artifacts. And that's what ultimately she finds a vial, and that sets the story into motion. And yes, Julie, to answer your question, I went mudlarking. In fact, the paperback, I have a mudlarking 101 guide for anybody who wants to go that hasn't been. I highly recommend it. It's a great way to spend an afternoon instead of a museum or doing another tourist attraction. The primary caveat is that you do have to have a license to go. And so you would need to obtain that, at least a few weeks before you head over if you're, going from the States. So it's so much fun. I did not find any apothecary vials while I was mudlarking, but I found lots of cool pottery pieces, fragments, and a portion of a clay pipe as well. So it was a great experience.
Really cool. Does it smell really bad?
It doesn't. No. Okay. In fact, that's one small liberty that I took when writing the story. My character says that she thinks that it does kind of have a bad odor, but the truth is, at least in the areas that I was, there was no odor whatsoever.
But it's a fascinating, that's what I love about fiction and I love about stories. It just makes it introduces you to things that you made, and mudlarking is one of them. So.
That's right. Sarah, did you go mudlarking before you put it in the book, or did you go mudlarking because you knew you wanted to put it in the book?
I went mudlarking after the book was essentially written and agented, but not yet sold to HarperCollins. So I was able to, I'd known about mudlarking because I love old historical artifacts and things like that. And on Instagram, there's so many cool mudlarkers. So I was familiar with what it was. I put it into my book. And then once my agent and I were working on revisions, I went out to London and I was able to go and kind of incorporate some of that sensory detail into the story.
Yeah.
Very cool. By the way, Laurie, Donna Lico? Donna's on here with us. So hi, Donna. So I think we have time for one more question here from Ruth. So back to you, Laurie, on this. Did you always have a desire to bring historical characters alive? Have you ever been drawn to writing about current affairs, or do current affairs influence your choice of historical narratives? From a civilian, she says.
From a civilian. That's such a good, complicated question.
Right.
So my first novel was actually a contemporary women's fiction. It was called Linnell by the Sea. And after that, I wrote a novel with my very good friend, Laura Marowitz, who is an art historian. And I realized that writing historical fiction allows me to do the research that is incredibly enjoyable. And, I've spent a lot of time thinking about, where does women's historical fiction sort of fall in the greater idea of literature? And in fact, Virginia Woolf, in A Room of One's Own, which started out as a commencement address at a women's college in 1925, said to the class of women's graduates, go out and write women's stories, because they're in the margins. And if you don't write them, if the women who are educated don't write them, no one else is going to. So now I love it. And sometimes I think, oh yeah, I have an idea for something that's contemporary, but it doesn't have the same immersive quality for me. Maybe someday it will. I mean, maybe it will, but for right now, I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. And if
Excellent.
people want to read it, all the better.
Well, this has been, so as we wrap up here, so Sarah, for you, okay. Oh, well, one other quick one, because Julie's asking, how was it to base your novel in the US after basing your last novel in Europe?
Well, especially since it was the pandemic, it was a really good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I didn't have to get anything translated. I didn't have to fly anywhere. I could drive up to Salem,
Right.
and I didn't feel like I had to learn an entire milieu. True or not, I grew up in the Northeast. I grew up in New York, on Long Island. So it's not a foreign country that you're not learning everything new again, except for the time period. So I really liked it, and I'm putting my next book in America too. And Sarah, what did you feel about doing research in England? It was fun, right?
Yeah, I'm fortunate that they speak English there, so there wasn't the translation barrier. And having been to London so many times, it really feels like a familiar place for me. So I've always loved setting stories in London, but I do think with book 3, I'm gonna go elsewhere.
Ooh.
Yeah.
A little teaser there.
I heard.
Yeah, today I finally put pen to paper on book 3. So I've spent the last few months working on my synopsis with my agent. And finally today I have the green light. So I started writing today. So it'll take me quite a while. It's a very ambitious project. Stay tuned.
I love it. Okay, we still have questions. I'm going to go as long as there's questions coming in. So Mary, I believe Mary might be related to you as well.
Oh my God, my family really came through.
They came through for you. It's release day. It's so exciting to be on release day.
Thank you.
And to have everybody be together on release day, even virtually. It's really, fun.
Wonderful. Thank you for doing this for me, Julie.
Oh, absolutely. So Mary wants to know, can you tell us about we're just releasing HESTER, but she wants to know about your next book.
Oh my God. Well, I feel like I will just say this. My next book is about Margaret Fuller, the woman who I wanted, the woman to have an affair with Nathaniel Hawthorne, but I just couldn't make her climb into bed with him. So she's an early American feminist. She's very important in early American feminism. And very, very early American journalism. She ends up going to Italy and becoming involved in the Italian Revolution, which also all of us Italian Americans, we know so little about our Italian history and the Italian Revolution. So I've learned a lot, and now it's just taking that and once again taking what I've learned and making it a really good story. So
we know it will be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Sarah, for you, as we're wrapping up here, how do you like to connect with your fans? Do you Instagram, Twitter? What do you like to do?
So I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. My preferred social media platform is Instagram. I just think it's the most fun and visual, but I'm not hard to find. I also have a website, so people can find me there if they want to shoot me an email. That works too.
Perfect. And is it just Sarah Penner?
sarahpenner.com.
Perfect. And Laurie, how about you? How do you like to connect with your fans?
I have to say, Instagram is the same. Instagram, it's fun, it's visual, you don't need a lot of words, and it's really easy to share what people, the beautiful arrangements, the photographs that people take. It's just, you just pop it into your story, and it's just so user-friendly and fun. Yes.
Well, and you both have wonderful, we're talking about covers, you both have wonderful covers to be able to do wonderful Instagram posts with, and can't wait for London Seance Society. So ladies, thank you. This has been really fun.
Thank you, Julie. It was really great.
Thank you, Julie, and congratulations again, Laurie, to you. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for taking your time tonight to talk with me, Sarah. I'll see you in the green room.
There you go. All right, you guys have a great evening. And Laurie, go back and look. Lots of love for you on that comment section. So it'll be fun. All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.